At 22:23 hours on April 13, 1945, Private Willie Arsenault's body jerked backward as the MG-42 machine gun rounds tore through his chest. The 21-year-old French-Canadian collapsed into the mud outside Zwolle, Netherlands, his blood mixing with rainwater in the darkness. 30 feet away, pressed flat against the cold earth, 24-year-old Private Léo Major counted muzzle flashes, 4 separate positions, at least 2 MG-42s, multiple Kar 98K rifles. The Germans had them bracketed in a textbook crossfire pattern along the rail line entering Zwolle from the south. Major's one good eye, his left had been destroyed by a phosphorus grenade on D-Day 10 months earlier, tracked the tracer rounds cutting through the darkness above his head. The mission had been simple reconnaissance. 2 scouts from the Régiment de la Chaudière, 1st Canadian Army, sent ahead to contact Butch resistance fighters inside the German-occupied city. The 4th Canadian Armored Division planned to shell Zwolle at dawn, a standard softening bombardment before the infantry assault. Major and Arsenault were supposed to gather intelligence on German positions, maybe coordinate with the underground to minimize civilian casualties when 25-pounder guns started dropping high explosive rounds into the city of 50,000 people. Now Arsenault was dead, and Major was pinned down 200 yards from Zwolle's southern checkpoints, with German patrols closing in from 3 directions. The Wehrmacht troops moved with practiced efficiency, 2 fire teams advancing in bounds while the machine guns maintained suppressive fire. They'd done this before, probably Eastern Front veterans transferred west as the Reich collapsed. Major could hear German NCOs barking orders, crisp, professional. These weren't scared conscripts or Volkssturm militia. These were regular army, possibly mixed with SS units based on the aggressive flanking maneuver developing to his left. Major's equipment check took 3 seconds. Sten Mk2 submachine gun with 4 32-round magazines, 17 No. 36 Mills fragmentation grenades distributed across his webbing. He always carried more grenades than regulation. Fighting knife, Browning high-power pistol with 3 13-round magazines. No radio. This was supposed to be a quiet infiltration. The nearest German fire team was 80 yards away and closing. Their Stahlhelm helmets caught moonlight as they moved through the rail yard. 6 men, moving in pairs. Textbook small unit tactics that would have them on his position in less than 90 seconds. Major had 2 options. Surrender meant interrogation, probably execution. The Germans had been shooting Allied paratroopers and commandos since Arnhem 7 months ago. Fighting meant engaging at least 30 German soldiers with good cover and overlapping fields of fire while lying in an open field with a dead partner. Then Major looked at Arsenault's body, his friend from Quebec. They'd shared cigarettes in England before D-Day, talked about Montreal winters, survived Normandy hedgerows and Scheldt mud together. Now Willie was face down in Dutch mud, with half his chest blown apart by German 7.92mm rounds. Something cold settled into Major's chest. Not rage exactly, something quieter, more focused. The Germans had killed his friend. In 4 hours, Canadian artillery would turn Zwolle into rubble, killing hundreds, maybe thousands of Dutch civilians, unless someone did something about those 200-plus German soldiers occupying the city. The lead German fire team was 60 yards away. Major could see the team leader's MP-40 submachine guns sweeping left to right, standard search pattern. They'd reach Arsenault's body in 45 seconds. His position in 60. Major made his decision. Not surrender, not escape, something else entirely. He began crawling backward, using a shallow drainage ditch for concealment. Every few yards, he pulled the pin on a Mills grenade but held the safety lever, placed them carefully in the mud, created a trail of armed grenades leading away from Arsenault's body. The first German to kick one would trigger a chain reaction. The MG-42 on his right stopped firing to change barrels. 250 rounds of rapid fire overheated the barrel in less than a minute. Major used the pause to low-crawl 40 yards through standing water that smelled like cow manure and diesel fuel. His uniform soaked through, mud in his webbing, water in his boots. The temperature was 4 degrees Celsius, cold enough that his fingers started going numb. Behind him, the first grenade detonated, then the second, then 3 more in rapid succession. Screaming in German, someone calling for a medic. The MG-42s opened up again, firing blind into the darkness, tracers arcing across the rail yard. The Germans thought they were taking mortar fire. Major reached a concrete culvert running under the rail embankment, 4 feet in diameter, half flooded. He could hear rats splashing in the darkness ahead. He pushed inside, Sten gun first, moving through knee-deep water that stank of sewage. On the other side, he emerged 150 yards from where the Germans were still shooting at shadows. He could see the southern checkpoint into Zwolle clearly now. 2 Wehrmacht soldiers manning a barrier, MG-42 position in a sandbagged emplacement, 4-man patrol walking the perimeter. Beyond them, the dark streets of Zwolle stretched north toward the city center. Major checked his watch, 22:41 hours. In 7 hours, Canadian guns would open fire. The Dutch resistance contact was somewhere in the city, but finding them would take time he didn't have. The German garrison needed to believe they were under attack by a full Canadian unit, not one half-blind private from Montreal. He studied the checkpoint. The MG-42 team had their gun oriented south, covering the approach road. The 2 guards were smoking, weapons slung. The patrol was 200 yards east, moving away. Major pulled 3 grenades from his webbing. What he was about to attempt was insane. 1 man against an entire German garrison. But Willie Arsenault was dead, and 50,000 Dutch civilians were about to die at dawn unless someone convinced 200 German soldiers to abandon their positions. He'd make them think the entire Canadian army had come for them.
Major moved through the darkness toward the checkpoint, keeping low behind a line of destroyed railway cars. The metal was twisted from previous Allied bombing runs, creating jagged shadows that concealed his approach. 20 yards from the MG-42 position, he stopped. The German gunner was adjusting his ammunition belt, 250 rounds of 7.92 millimeter linked rounds. His assistant gunner was cleaning mud off spare barrels with an oily rag. Neither was looking south. The mathematics were simple and brutal. 2 guards at the barrier, 2 on the machine gun, 4-man patrol 300 yards away and moving farther. 8 Germans, 1 Canadian. But Major had studied German defensive doctrine at training camps in England. They built their entire tactical system around the MG-42. Take out the machine gun and their fire superiority disappeared. Control the machine gun and he controlled the checkpoint. He pulled the pin on a Mills grenade, counted to 2, and threw it in a high arc over the destroyed railway cars. It landed 40 yards beyond the checkpoint and detonated with a sharp crack. All 4 Germans at the position spun toward the explosion, weapons raised. Major was already moving. He covered the 20 yards in 4 seconds, Sten gun tight against his shoulder. The first guard never heard him coming. Major's knife went in under the helmet rim, severing the spinal cord at the base of the skull. The German dropped without a sound. The second guard started to turn, mouth opening to shout a warning. Major drove the knife up under his chin, through the soft palate, into the brain. The guard's eyes went wide, then empty. His Kar 98K rifle clattered against the sandbags. The MG-42 gunner heard the noise and started to swing the machine gun around. Major dropped the knife, brought up the Sten, and put a 3-round burst through the gunner's temple at 4 feet. The assistant gunner fumbled for his Luger pistol. Major's second burst caught him in the throat. Blood sprayed across the ammunition boxes. 7 seconds, 4 Germans dead. The patrol was still 350 yards away, investigating the grenade explosion. Major dragged the bodies behind the sandbags and took inventory. The MG-42 with 800 rounds of belted ammunition, 4 Kar 98K rifles with 200 rounds of 7.92 millimeter ammunition, 2 MP-40 submachine guns with 6 32-round magazines, 4 stick grenades, 2 Luger pistols, 1 Wehrmacht sergeant's uniform jacket that wasn't too blood-soaked to wear. He pulled on the German jacket over his Canadian uniform. In the darkness, at distance, it might buy him a few seconds of confusion. He hefted the MG-42, 26 pounds unloaded, 32 pounds with the ammunition belt. German engineering at its finest, 1,200 rounds per minute cyclic rate. They called it Hitler's buzzsaw because of the distinctive ripping sound when fired. Major had trained on captured MG-42s in England. He knew the weapon's characteristics, how to clear jams, how to change barrels, how the Germans used it as the cornerstone of their squad tactics. Now he'd use their own weapon against them. The 4-man patrol was returning, flashlights sweeping the ground where the grenade had exploded. Major waited until they were 100 yards away, then opened fire with the MG-42. Not at them, over their heads. The distinctive ripping bursts sent them diving for cover. He fired another burst to the left, then grabbed 2 Kar 98K rifles and sprinted into Zwolle's streets. The city was blacked out, but Major's one eye had adjusted to the darkness. 3-story brick buildings lined the streets, narrow alleys between them, church spires visible against the sky. He could hear German voices behind him, the patrol calling for reinforcements, reporting contact with enemy forces at the checkpoint. Major turned left down Stationsweg, then right onto Burgermeister von Reuensingle. He needed to create multiple contact points, make the Germans think they were being hit from different directions by different units. At the intersection with Whipstrick Alley, he spotted what he needed: another German checkpoint, 6 soldiers, another MG-42 position.
This time, he didn't use stealth. He fired one of the captured Kar 98K rifles from 150 yards, deliberately missing high. The Germans scrambled for cover, shouting warnings. Major fired twice more, then ran east through an alley, circled back, and threw 2 German stick grenades from a different angle. While the Germans fired at his previous position, he sprinted past them, heading north, firing the second Kar 98K as he ran. The city was waking up now. German voices echoing off buildings, truck engines starting, NCOs bellowing orders. Major could hear hobnailed boots running on cobblestones, at least 2 squads converging on the explosions. He ducked into a narrow passage between 2 houses. An elderly Dutch woman peered at him through a window, her face pale in the darkness. Major pressed a finger to his lips. She nodded and pulled her curtains closed. At 23:17 hours, Major reached the Grote Markt, Zwolle's central square. The Grote Kerk Church dominated the eastern side, its 75-meter tower visible even in blackout conditions. German vehicles were parked in neat rows outside what looked like a commandeered hotel. A swastika flag hung from the second floor. This was their garrison headquarters. Major counted 12 vehicles, 4 Opel Blitz trucks, 3 Kubelwagens, 2 BMW R75 motorcycles with sidecars, 3 SDKFZ 251 half-tracks with mounted MG-42s. Enough transport for at least 150 soldiers. A German officer emerged from the hotel, buttoning his uniform jacket. Hauptmann, rank insignia, captain. Clean uniform, staff officer, not combat troops. He was shouting at a group of soldiers pointing south toward the gunfire.
Two squads formed up and double-timed toward the checkpoint Major had overrun 20 minutes ago. That left maybe 40 soldiers visible around the headquarters. Too many for a direct assault, but Major didn't need to kill them all. He needed them to panic, to think Canadian armor was rolling into Zwolle, to believe continuing resistance meant death. He set up the captured MG-42 in a second-floor window overlooking the square. The elderly Dutch couple who lived there wordlessly helped him move furniture to barricade the door. The woman handed him a thermos of ersatz coffee. The man pointed out German positions from the window. He'd been watching them for months. Major waited until the two squads were 400 yards away, then opened fire on the vehicles in the square. The MG-42's tracer rounds walked across the Opel trucks, shattering windshields, puncturing fuel tanks. One truck exploded, then another. Burning gasoline spread across the cobblestones. Germans scattered in every direction, some firing blindly at windows, others running for cover. Major burned through 150 rounds in controlled bursts, then grabbed the MG-42 and ran. Down the stairs, out the back door, through 3 gardens, over a fence. Behind him, Germans kicked in the front door of the house he'd just left. He was one man with stolen weapons against 200 German soldiers, but they didn't know that. In their minds, Canadian forces had breached the perimeter at multiple points. The enemy was in the city, hitting them from different directions. Major checked his ammunition. 650 rounds for the MG-42, 90 rounds of Kar 98K ammunition, 4 magazines for his Sten gun, 13 grenades, 3 hours and 43 minutes until dawn. The Germans had killed Willie Arsenault. They thought they held Zwolle. He'd show them they were wrong.
At 23:41 hours, Major watched a German sentry walk his post along the Wilhelmsvaart Canal. Every 90 seconds, the soldier reached the end of his 50-yard patrol route, turned and walked back, like clockwork. Eastern Front veterans might know combat, but garrison duty made men predictable. Major waited in the shadows of a boathouse, timing the sentry's movement. The German was young, maybe 19, probably conscripted in the last desperate mobilizations. His Kar 98K rifle hung loose on its sling. He kept rubbing his hands together against the cold. When the sentry turned at the far end of his route, Major moved. 40 yards in 12 seconds, soft-soled boots silent on wet cobblestones. The German heard nothing until Major's hand clamped over his mouth. The knife went in at the 3rd cervical vertebra, angled upward. The sentry went limp instantly. Major lowered the body into the canal. It sank with barely a splash. One less German, 199 to go. Major took the sentry's rifle and ammunition pouches, 60 rounds of 7.92 millimeters. Every bullet mattered now. He also took the German's pocket watch, identification papers, and a half-eaten chocolate bar from his breast pocket. The papers identified him as Grenadier Hans Müller, 361st Volksgrenadier Division, regular infantry, not SS. The sound of engines drew Major north towards Sassenstraat. 3 Opel Blitz trucks rolling slowly down the street, soldiers with flashlights walking alongside, checking doorways and alleys. Search pattern. They were looking for Canadian infiltrators. Major set up the MG-42 on the flat roof of a bakery, bracing it against a chimney. The trucks were 200 yards away, moving at walking speed. He aimed at the lead vehicle's engine block and squeezed the trigger. The MG-42 hammered out a 5-second burst, 100 rounds downrange. The lead truck's hood exploded in sparks and steam. The windshield disintegrated. The driver slumped over the wheel. The truck veered left and crashed into a storefront. Major shifted aim to the second truck, another 5-second burst into the cab and engine. It lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from under the hood. Germans were diving for cover, shouting, firing wildly at rooftops. Major grabbed the MG-42 and ran across the roof, jumping a 3-foot gap to the next building. He'd learned free running in Montreal as a kid, scaling buildings to steal from market stalls. Now those skills kept him alive as German rounds cracked past his head. He dropped through a skylight into someone's attic, a family huddled in the corner, mother, father, 3 children. They stared at him in terror. Major held up his hands, showing them the maple leaf insignia on his collar under the stolen German jacket. "Canadian," he whispered in French.
Canadien. The father's eyes widened. He pointed to a ladder leading down. Bonne chance, he whispered. Major descended into a second-floor hallway. Through a window, he could see Germans setting up a perimeter around the destroyed trucks. An officer was screaming into a field telephone. More soldiers were running from the direction of headquarters, at least 2 full squads. Time to move. Major went out the back door into an alley that reeked of garbage and urine. He turned north, then east, putting distance between himself and the German response. At the intersection of Sassenstraat and Straat, he found what he was looking for: the Gestapo headquarters. The 3-story building had been a police station before the occupation. Now swastika banners hung from the windows. 2 guards at the entrance, probably more inside. The Gestapo would have files on the Dutch resistance, lists of Jews in hiding, interrogation records. Destroying it would help the civilians and terrify the Germans. Major didn't have enough explosives to level the building, but he didn't need to. Fire would do the job. He climbed onto an adjacent building's roof, then jumped across to the Gestapo building. The slate tiles were slippery from rain. He nearly lost his footing twice. On the roof, he found a maintenance door, locked, but the hinges were on the outside. He used his knife to pop the pins. The door fell inward with a crash. No response. The building seemed mostly empty, probably just a skeleton crew at night.
Major descended into the 3rd floor. Offices with filing cabinets, papers everywhere. He kicked indoors, looking for something flammable. In a supply closet, he found what he needed: 2 5-gallon cans of petrol for their vehicles, plus cleaning supplies, including turpentine. He started on the top floor, splashing petrol across documents, desks, and wooden floors. The fumes made his eye water. 2nd floor, more petrol, soaking everything. He could hear the guards outside talking, unaware their building was about to become an inferno. On the 1st floor, he found the interrogation rooms. Blood on the floors, restraints bolted to chairs, a table with pliers, hammers, electrical equipment. Major's jaw clenched. He'd heard about Gestapo methods. Now he was seeing their workspace. He emptied the last of the petrol in the main records room. Hundreds of files on Zwolle citizens, collaboration reports, denunciations, death sentences, all soaked in gasoline. Major struck a match and dropped it. The fire spread instantly, racing along petrol trails, up walls, across ceilings. Within seconds, the entire 1st floor was ablaze. Major went out a window as the guards came running in the front door. They lasted maybe 10 seconds before the smoke and heat drove them back out, screaming for help. By 0018 hours on April 14, the Gestapo headquarters was fully engulfed. 3 stories of flames lighting up 6 city blocks, windows exploding from heat, burning papers floating through the air like hellish snowflakes. Every German in Zwolle could see it. Major watched from 300 yards away as German fire crews arrived. They tried to set up hoses, but he put a few bursts from the MG42 over their heads, sending them scrambling for cover. Let it burn. Let them see their control burning. He was down to 400 rounds for the MG42. Time to resupply. Moving through back streets, Major headed for the firefight he'd created earlier. The Germans would have secured the area by now, but they'd also have ammunition. He found what he expected. A squad had set up a defensive position around the destroyed trucks, expecting another attack. Major circled wide, came at them from the north. The Germans were all facing south, watching the wrong direction. He got within 30 yards before opening fire. Short, controlled bursts. 3 Germans down before the others reacted. They spun around, confused, firing at shadows. Major had already displaced, moving west through a garden. He threw 2 grenades from his new position, then ran south. The Germans fired at where the grenades came from. Classic mistake, shooting at the last known position instead of predicting movement. From the south, Major fired the MP40, full magazine, 32 rounds spraying across their sandbags. More Germans down. The survivors broke and ran, abandoning their position. Major moved in quickly, grabbing ammunition boxes. 600 rounds of MG42 ammunition, 4 boxes of 7.92mm rifle rounds, 6 stick grenades, 2 MP40s with ammunition. A half-track roared around the corner, its mounted MG-42 swiveling toward him. Major dove behind the destroyed truck as rounds sparked off metal. The half-track's machine gun hammered out long bursts, pinning him down. Then the gun stopped. Barrel change. The gunner had fired too long, overheated his weapon. Major popped up and put a full burst into the half-track's open compartment. The gunner toppled backward. The driver tried to reverse, but Major shot out his vision block. The vehicle crashed into a building wall. At 00:43 hours, Major realized something had changed. The German response was becoming disorganized. Units were firing at each other in the darkness, mistaking friendlies for enemies. Orders were being shouted in 3 different directions. Their command structure was breaking down. He'd killed maybe 20 Germans, but in their minds they were under assault by multiple Canadian units hitting them from every direction. The garrison commander had to be getting panicked reports. Checkpoint overrun, vehicles destroyed, Gestapo headquarters burning, casualties mounting, enemy strength unknown. Major checked his ammunition one more time. He had enough for maybe 2 more hours of hit-and-run attacks. After that, he'd be down to grenades and stolen weapons. But he could hear it now in the German voices, the edge of fear. They didn't know where the next attack would come from, didn't know how many Canadians were in their city. They were beginning to break.
At 01:07 hours, Major watched a German platoon moving down out of Fischmarkt in tactical column. 36 men, 2 MG-42 teams. The lieutenant kept checking his map with a flashlight, clearly lost in Zwolle's medieval street layout. They were heading toward the canal bridges, probably ordered to set up blocking positions. Major had climbed into the bell tower of St. Michielskerk, lugging the MG-42 up the narrow spiral stairs. From 60 feet up, he could see half the city. German vehicles racing through streets, soldiers running between positions. The Gestapo buildings still burning, casting orange light across the rooftops, and this platoon walking into his field of fire. He let them get 150 yards from the church, then opened up with the MG-42. Tracers lashed down from the bell tower, walking through the German column. Men scattered in every direction. Some dove behind market stalls, others pressed against building walls. The lieutenant was screaming orders, trying to organize return fire. Major burned through 100 rounds, then grabbed his weapons and ran down the stairs. He could hear rounds cracking through the bell tower windows above. The Germans were concentrating fire on his previous position, exactly what he wanted. He exited through the church's back door, sprinted 2 blocks east, and climbed onto a warehouse roof. The German platoon was reorganizing, 2 squads moving to flank the church while 1 provided covering fire. Textbook tactics, but they were flanking an empty building. Major set up the MG-42 again and hit them from their new left flank. Another 75-round burst, more Germans down. The survivors couldn't understand it. The machine gun fire had shifted 90 degrees in less than a minute. How many enemy gunners were out there? A German sergeant was shouting into a radio handset, calling for armor support. Major heard the word Panzer repeated twice. That was bad news. If they brought in tanks, even old Panzer IVs, his mobility advantage disappeared. He displaced again, leaving the MG-42, too heavy to keep carrying. Still had the Sten gun with 3 magazines, 2 MP-40s, and 9 grenades. He needed to create more chaos before any armor arrived. At the intersection of Luttenbergstraat and Twiststraat, Major found a German supply convoy, 4 trucks loaded with ammunition and food supplies. Only 6 guards, probably rear echelon troops. They were standing around smoking, rifles leaning against the trucks. Major threw 3 grenades in quick succession. The first landed under the lead truck. The second hit the ammunition truck. The third bounced off a tailgate and rolled under the fuel supply vehicle. The explosions came almost simultaneously. The ammunition truck went up like a fireworks display, small arms rounds cooking off in every direction, tracer rounds spiraling into the night sky. The fuel truck became a massive fireball, flames shooting 40 feet high. Windows shattered for 2 blocks in every direction.
Major was already running when the secondary explosions started. Behind him, thousands of rounds of ammunition continued detonating, creating a sound like a full-scale firefight. Every German in Zwolle would think a major battle was happening. At 0141 hours, he reached the Isel River Bridge on the north side of town. This was a critical position. If the Germans held the bridge, they could bring in reinforcements from Meppel. A full squad was dug in around the approach with an MG-42 covering the roadway, but they were all facing north, watching for Canadian armor coming from that direction. Nobody was watching their backs. Major worked his way through private gardens until he was 40 yards behind their position. In the flickering light from the still-burning convoy, he could see a German Feldwebel, Sergeant Major, talking on a field telephone. The conversation was animated, lots of "Ja, Herr Hauptmann," and worried looks. If you want to see how one half-blind Canadian private convinced an entire German garrison to abandon a city, hit that subscribe button right now. It tells YouTube to share these stories with more people who need to hear them. Major pulled the pin on a stick grenade, counted to 2, and threw it into the German position. Before it exploded, he was already throwing a second, then a third. The blasts came in rapid succession, Germans screaming, someone calling for a medic. Major came at them from the left side, MP-40 chattering in his hands. Short bursts, controlled. Ammunition discipline even in chaos. 4 Germans down, the rest running. The Feldwebel tried to rally them, but Major put 3 rounds through his chest at 20 yards. The bridge was temporarily clear, but Major didn't try to hold it. One man couldn't hold a bridge. Instead, he ran to the German field telephone and picked up the handset. He could hear a German officer demanding a situation report.
Major summoned his best German accent and screamed into the phone, "Kanadier! Kanadier überall! Sie kommen mit Panzern!" Canadians, Canadians everywhere! They're coming with tanks! Then he ripped the phone from its connection and threw it in the river. Back in the city, Major could see German units converging on the bridge, 2 half-tracks and at least 50 soldiers moving fast. Time to disappear again. He cut through Fundati Park using tree cover to break visual contact. His uniform was soaked with sweat despite the cold. His hands were cramping from gripping weapons. The adrenaline that had carried him for 2 hours was starting to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. But he couldn't stop. Not yet. At 02:03 hours, Major found himself near the Zwolle railway station. This was a major German strongpoint. They needed the rail junction to move troops and supplies. He could see 2 Panzer IV tanks parked outside, engines running, crews standing around, probably just awakened, dozens of infantry setting up defensive positions. Too many to attack directly. But Major noticed something, a fuel depot next to the station. Above-ground tanks, maybe 10,000 gallons of diesel and petrol. The Germans had sandbagged around it, but sandbags wouldn't stop fire. Major worked his way to within 80 yards of the depot. Guards were watching the main approaches, but they'd left the railway side undefended. He climbed through a gap in the fence, moving between freight cars. He didn't have enough explosives to breach the fuel tanks, but he didn't need to. The tanks had venting pipes on top, safety features to prevent pressure build-up. Major climbed onto the first tank, opened the vent and dropped in 2 white phosphorus grenades he'd been saving. The result was spectacular. White phosphorus burns at 2,800 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt steel. It ignited the fuel vapor instantly. The tank didn't explode, it erupted like a volcano, sending a column of burning fuel 100 feet into the air. Major was already at the second tank, dropping in his last WP grenade. Another eruption. Burning fuel rained down across the railway yard. The wooden freight cars caught fire. The station building's roof ignited. The panzer crews scrambled into their tanks, trying to move them away from the spreading inferno. Infantry ran in every direction. Officers screamed contradictory orders. In the chaos, Major slipped away into the smoke, moving south toward the city centre. He could hear explosions behind him as more fuel tanks ruptured from heat. The entire railway complex was burning now, visible for miles. Every German unit in the region would see it and think Zwolle was falling. At 02:27 hours, Major stopped in an abandoned shop to assess his situation. His ammunition was almost gone. 1 magazine for the Sten, partial magazine in the MP40, 4 grenades. His hands were shaking from exhaustion. His good eye was bloodshot and watering from smoke exposure. But the Germans were cracking. He could hear it in the radio traffic from captured handsets. Panicked reports of Canadian paratroopers, enemy armour, casualties mounting. One officer claimed an entire Canadian battalion was in the city. Another reported enemy strengths of at least company size, attacking from 3 directions. Major allowed himself a grim smile. They thought they were fighting hundreds of Canadians. It was still just him, one man, making them see ghosts in every shadow. He checked his watch. 2 hours and 33 minutes until dawn, until the Canadian artillery would fire if the Germans still held Zwolle. Time to convince them to leave.
At 02:44 a.m., Major watched 8 German soldiers trudging down Camperstraat. They weren't moving tactically anymore. No bounding overwatch, no covering sectors. They walked bunched together like lost sheep, weapons carried loose, heads down. The NCO leading them kept stopping to argue with his map. These weren't elite troops. Their uniforms were mismatched. One wore glasses held together with tape. Another looked barely 16. Rear echelon support personnel pressed into infantry duty as the garrison fell apart. Major stepped out of the shadows 20 feet in front of them, Sten gun leveled at chest height. Hände hoch! Hands up! 8 Kar 98K rifles clattered on cobblestones. 16 hands shot toward the sky. The NCO, an Unteroffizier with Supply Corps insignia, actually looked relieved. Major kept the Sten trained on them while quick-checking their weapons. All loaded, none had fired recently. The barrels were cold. These men had been wandering the streets, hoping to avoid contact. English? Major asked. The Unteroffizier nodded. Little bit. You're prisoners of the Canadian Army. March south to our lines. Try to escape. We have snipers on every roof. Major didn't mention he was the only Canadian for miles. Move now. The Germans looked at each other, then started walking. The Unteroffizier paused. How many of you are there? Major smiled coldly. Enough. He watched them disappear into the darkness, then collected their weapons. 8 rifles with 120 rounds total. He couldn't carry them all, so he field-stripped the rifles, throwing bolts and triggers into the canal. Let the Germans find useless weapons if they came back this way. 3 blocks north, Major heard engines, multiple vehicles moving slowly, infantry walking alongside. He climbed onto a roof for better visibility. A German combat patrol. 2 SDKF 251 half-tracks with mounted MG-42s, around 20 soldiers. They were checking every building, every alley, methodical search pattern. But they were checking ground level, not looking up. Major positioned himself 4 roofs ahead of their search pattern. When they passed beneath him, he dropped 2 grenades into the lead half-track's open top. The explosions inside the armored compartment were muffled but devastating. Smoke poured from every opening. The vehicle lurched to a stop. The second half-track's gunner swiveled his MG-42 upward, searching for targets. Major was already gone, 3 roofs away. He fired his MP-40 from the new position, short burst, just enough to make them think multiple shooters. The Germans scattered, firing at both positions. In the confusion, Major dropped to street level behind them. He could hear the patrol leader radioing for support, reporting contact with mehrere feindliche Einheiten, multiple enemy units. At 03:12 a.m., Major found what he'd been looking for. Stragglers. 12 German soldiers huddled in a doorway near the Grote Markt.
Their uniforms were scorched from fighting fires. 2 were wounded, makeshift bandages on arms and legs. They looked exhausted, defeated. Major approached from behind, Sten gun ready. Nobody move. They turned slowly. One started to reach for his rifle. The man next to him grabbed his arm, shook his head. They'd had enough. "You're prisoners," Major announced. "Leave your weapons. Walk to the southern checkpoint. Hands on your heads. Canadian forces control this sector now." A Gefreiter, corporal, spoke up. "The checkpoint is destroyed. We saw it burning." "Then keep walking south until you meet our lines," Major gestured with the Sten. "Go, unless you'd prefer to die for a lost cause." They went, 12 more Germans out of the fight. As they left their weapons, Major noticed something. 3 of the rifles had SS runes carved in the stocks, so there were SS units mixed in with the regular Wehrmacht. That explained some of the fierce resistance earlier. Major dragged the abandoned weapons into an alley and disabled them. He kept one MP40 with 3 magazines. His Sten had 8 rounds left. After that, he'd be down to battlefield pickups and grenades. The sound of tank engines made him freeze. Not the diesel knock of Panzer IVs, something heavier. Through the smoke drifting from multiple fires across the city, Major saw it. A Tiger tank rolling down Sassenstraat, 88mm gun traversing slowly, 60 tons of armor that his small arms couldn't even scratch. But the Tiger wasn't advancing aggressively. It moved in starts and stops, the commander's head barely visible above the cupola, scanning nervously. They were scared of Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets that Major didn't have.
Major remembered something from training. Tiger tanks consumed massive amounts of fuel, 50 gallons per hour in combat conditions. That beast had probably been running for 3 hours since the alert started. It needed refueling soon, or it would become a 60-ton roadblock. He paralleled the Tiger's movement, staying in the shadows. It stopped at an intersection. The commander climbed out to confer with an infantry officer. Major could see them arguing, pointing in different directions. The infantry officer wanted the tank to support his positions. The tank commander kept pointing at his fuel gauge. That's when Major noticed the fuel truck parked 2 blocks away, an Opel Blitz with distinctive fuel barrels in the bed. 2 guards, both watching the Tiger, probably waiting for it to come refuel. Major circled wide, approaching the fuel truck from behind. The guards never saw him coming. His knife took the first one silently. The second started to turn. Major's last Sten gun burst dropped him. 8 rounds, point blank. The magazine was empty. He climbed into the truck's cab. Keys in the ignition. German efficiency. The engine started immediately. Major put it in gear and accelerated toward the Tiger tank, building speed. The tank crew saw the truck coming. The commander waved, thinking his fuel had arrived. At 40 yards, Major aimed the truck at the Tiger's side and jumped from the cab. He hit the cobblestones hard, rolling twice, skin tearing from his palms. The fuel truck smashed into the Tiger's tracks and bogie wheels. The impact ruptured the fuel barrels, spilling 200 gallons of diesel across the street. Major had 1 white phosphorus grenade left. He pulled the pin and threw it into the spreading fuel. The diesel ignited instantly, engulfing the Tiger's lower hull. Flames licked up around the engine deck. The tank commander screamed orders. The driver tried to move, but the damaged track wouldn't engage. They were immobilized, surrounded by fire. The crew bailed out, 5 men scrambling from hatches, uniforms smoking. They ran without looking back. The Tiger's ammunition would cook off soon. When 88mm rounds started exploding, nobody wanted to be close. Major faded back into the shadows as more Germans arrived. An entire company, maybe 80 men, converging on the burning tank. Officers shouting, soldiers pointing in different directions. Nobody knew where the attack had come from. At 0341 hours, the Tiger's ammunition detonated. The turret lifted 3 feet off the hull before crashing back down. The blast shattered windows for 4 blocks. Burning chunks of armor plate scattered across the intersection. In the reflected firelight, Major saw something that made him pause. A German Hauptmann, captain, was arguing with a major. The major kept pointing north, toward the edges of town. The Hauptmann shook his head, pointed at defensive positions. They were arguing about withdrawal. The garrison was starting to crack. Major needed to push them over the edge.
He worked his way toward a group of Germans setting up a roadblock. 15 men stacking furniture and sandbags. They looked jumpy, weapons pointed outward in all directions. He watched them for 5 minutes, noting their pattern. The MG-42 team on the left, riflemen spread across the barricade, one NCO walking back and forth trying to steady his men. Major didn't have ammunition for a firefight, but he didn't need to kill them. He needed to break them. He pulled his second-to-last grenade, threw it to their left. As they turned toward the explosion, he threw his last grenade to their right. In the confusion, he stood up 40 yards behind them and shouted in his best command voice, "First platoon, prepare to advance. Second platoon, covering fire." The Germans spun around. In the darkness and smoke, they couldn't see anyone, but they heard English commands, multiple units. They were surrounded. Half of them ran immediately. The other half fired wildly into the darkness, then ran when no return fire came. The roadblock was abandoned in less than 30 seconds. Major checked his resources. No grenades left. 20 rounds for the MP40, his knife. That was all. But he could feel it. The German garrison was on the edge of panic. One more push might break them completely.
At 0349 hours, Major crouched in the rubble of a bombed-out bakery, hands trembling from exhaustion. His uniform was soaked through with a mixture of sweat, canal water, and blood, some his own, most German. His good eye felt like someone had poured sand in it. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest. But he couldn't rest, not yet. Through the broken wall, he watched Germans running, not advancing, not withdrawing tactically, running. 2 soldiers sprinted past, carrying nothing but their helmets. An officer tried to stop them, shouting orders that went ignored. A Kubelwagen raced down the street, going at least 60 kilometers per hour, far too fast for urban combat conditions. The German garrison was fracturing. Major forced himself to move. His legs felt like concrete, but Willie Arsenault's body was still lying in the mud outside town, and 50,000 Dutch civilians would die at dawn if those artillery guns opened fire. He had maybe 70 minutes left. He worked his way toward the sound of organized activity, German voices maintaining discipline, vehicle engines running at idle rather than racing. He found them at the Grote Markt, the city's main square. Maybe 100 German soldiers forming up in defensive perimeter around the commandeered hotel that served as garrison headquarters. Major climbed to a 3rd-floor window across the square. From there, he could see into the hotel's ground floor through the large windows. German officers clustered around a table covered with maps, a field telephone, a radio set. This was the command post. One officer stood out, older than the rest, oak leaves on his collar indicating a major's rank, probably the garrison commander. He was stabbing his finger at a map while 2 Hauptmanns argued with him. Even from 150 yards away, Major could see the tension in their postures. The German major picked up the field telephone, listened, slammed it down, picked it up again, barked orders, slammed it down harder. He turned to a radio operator, who shook his head, probably reporting more units out of contact. Major aimed his MP40 carefully. He had 20 rounds, needed to make them count. He fired a controlled burst through the hotel window. Glass exploded inward. German officers dove for cover. The radio went silent, its operator slumping over the equipment. Return fire came immediately, rifles and submachine guns from the defensive perimeter. Rounds punched through the walls around Major. He was already moving, crawling across the floor as bullets chewed through plaster above his head. Down the stairs, out the back, into an alley. His lungs burned. A stitch in his side felt like a knife blade. Behind him, Germans were shouting, organizing a squad to clear the building he'd just left. At 0357 hours, Major found himself near the northern checkpoint, the route toward Meppel and possible German reinforcements. A full platoon was dug in here, with 2 half-tracks and interlocking fields of fire. They weren't panicking like the others. These were veterans, probably the best troops the garrison had left. Major couldn't attack this position with 20 rifle rounds, but he could make them think they were about to be overrun. He found a German field telephone line running along the street, communications wire connecting the checkpoint to headquarters. He followed it to a junction box, opened it, and spliced into the line using wire from a destroyed lamppost, the basic telephone technique he'd learned in signals training. He picked up the handset and listened. German voices, the checkpoint platoon leader reporting to headquarters that his position was secure, no enemy contact. Major waited until the conversation ended, then spoke in German. Achtung, Achtung, enemy armor approaching from the north. 4 tanks, infantry support. Fall back to secondary positions immediately. He hung up before anyone could respond and ripped out the wiring. Through the darkness he heard confusion at the checkpoint, orders being shouted, the sound of half-tracks starting up, soldiers grabbing equipment. Within 3 minutes, the position was abandoned, troops withdrawing south toward the city center. Major smiled grimly. One checkpoint, abandoned without firing a shot. He circled back toward the Grota marked. The German command post had moved, probably after his MP-40 burst through the window, but he could track them by following the concentration of vehicles and disciplined troop movements. He found them 2 blocks east, in a sturdy brick building that had been a bank. Guards at every entrance, MG-42 positions covering approaches. The garrison commander had consolidated his remaining forces. Major counted maybe 120 Germans still organized and combat effective. The rest had scattered, fled, or were casualties. But 120 Germans with good defensive positions could still hold until dawn, could still bring down artillery on Zwolle if they thought the situation was hopeless. He needed them afraid, needed them to choose retreat over destruction.
At 04:08 hours, Major made his final play. He couldn't attack the bank directly. Too many guns, too little ammunition. But he could hit their morale. The burning Gestapo building was 5 blocks away, flames still visible. The destroyed Tiger tank blocked an intersection. The railway station burned like a beacon. The fuel depot continued to cook off occasional explosions. Major had turned Zwolle into a vision of hell, and the Germans were trapped in the middle. He used his last 20 MP-40 rounds to shoot out streetlights around the German positions. Darkness closed in. Then he started shouting in English from different locations. Baker Company, advance from the west. He ran 2 blocks. Charlie Company, flank right. Another block. Arma support, moving up. The Germans fired at the voices, muzzle flashes giving away their positions. But there was nothing to hit. Just one exhausted Canadian running through the darkness, creating the illusion of an entire assault force. Inside the bank, Major could see the German officers through a window. The garrison commander was on the radio now, probably calling for reinforcements or air support that wouldn't come. The front lines were collapsing everywhere in northwestern Germany. No help was coming to Zwolle. One of the Hauptmanns grabbed the commander's arm, pointing at a map, an escape route. The commander shook his head. The Hauptmann pointed more emphatically. Other officers joined the argument. Major watched the debate through the window. Everything came down to this moment. One German major deciding whether to hold a Dutch city or save his men. The garrison commander looked around at his officers, at the burning city visible through the windows, at the field telephone that kept bringing reports of destroyed positions and missing units, at a map showing no reinforcements, no relief, no hope. He nodded slowly. Orders went out immediately. German soldiers began breaking down defensive positions. Vehicles started loading. The half-tracks turned north, engines revving. Squads formed up in march order rather than combat dispersal. They were retreating. At 04:23 hours, the first German units moved out, heading north toward Meppel. Not running exactly, but moving fast. A fighting withdrawal from troops who'd had enough. Within 15 minutes, the trickle became a stream. Within 30 minutes, it was a flood. Major watched from the shadows as 200 German soldiers abandoned Zwolle. Some carried wounded comrades, some dragged equipment, some just walked with empty hands and empty eyes. An entire garrison evacuating a city because one Canadian made them believe they were facing an army. The Tiger tank still burned at the intersection, its 88mm gun pointed uselessly at the sky.
Around it, Germans streamed past without looking back. Major leaned against a wall, sliding down to sit on the cobblestones. His hands were still shaking. The MP-40 clattered on the stones beside him, empty, useless. His knife was somewhere. He couldn't remember dropping it. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten. Maybe 40 minutes until full dawn, until Canadian artillery would have opened fire on a city full of civilians. But the Germans were gone. The city was free. Major closed his good eye for just a moment. The adrenaline that had sustained him for 6 hours crashed all at once. Every injury made itself known. Cuts, bruises, burns, the aching exhaustion in every muscle. His hands were raw, bleeding in places. His uniform was destroyed. But Willie Arsenault had been avenged, and 50,000 Dutch people would wake up free. A window opened above him. An elderly Dutchman peered down, saw Major's Canadian insignia, and started to cry. Then he was shouting, banging on doors, running into the street. "Befraid! Befraid! The Canadians are here! Liberated! Liberated! The Canadians are here!" More windows opened. More Dutch civilians emerged from cellars and hiding places. They saw the Germans fleeing north, saw the fires dying down, saw one exhausted Canadian soldier sitting in the street. Major tried to stand. His legs wouldn't cooperate. A Dutch woman ran to him with water. A man brought bread. Children stared at him with wide eyes. "How many?" someone asked in English. "How many Canadian soldiers?" Major looked up at the crowd gathering around him, at the German vehicles disappearing to the north, at the city he'd liberated alone. "Enough," he said quietly. "We were enough."
At 05:02 hours, the 1st Canadian Scout car rolled into Zwolle from the south. Lieutenant Colonel Jacques Dextras of the Régiment de la Chaudière stood in the turret, scanning for German positions. What he saw made no sense. The city was burning in a dozen places. Destroyed German vehicles littered the streets. Dead soldiers lay in doorways and alleys. Smoke drifted across intersections where barricades had been abandoned mid-construction. Every sign pointed to a major battle. But there was no ongoing combat, no gunfire, no German resistance. And hundreds of Dutch civilians were celebrating in the streets, waving orange flags, embracing each other, crying with relief. Dextras's column advanced cautiously through the city, expecting ambush. Instead, they found more destruction, more abandoned positions, more celebrating civilians. The column reached the Grote Markt at 05:18 hours. That's where they found Major. He was sitting on the steps of the Grote Kerk, surrounded by Dutch families. Someone had given him coffee, real coffee, hoarded through 5 years of occupation. He held the cup in both hands, staring at nothing, his face blackened with smoke and streaked with sweat. Dextras dismounted and walked over. He recognized Major immediately. The eye patch was distinctive. Everyone in the regiment knew about the crazy bastard from Montreal who'd lost an eye on D-Day and refused evacuation. "Major? What the hell happened here?" Léo Major looked up. His good eye was bloodshot, unfocused. "The Germans left, sir. City's secure." "I can see that." Dextras gestured at the destruction visible from the square. "Where's Arsenault?" Major's jaw tightened. "Dead. Machine gun ambush at the southern checkpoint. 22-23 hours yesterday." "And the rest of your patrol?" "Just us two, sir. Reconnaissance mission." Dextras looked around at the burning buildings, destroyed vehicles, abandoned defensive positions. 2 men did this? "One, sir, after Willie got hit." Major took a sip of coffee. His hands were shaking. "The Germans thought we were a full assault force. I didn't correct their assumption." "You're telling me you liberated an entire city by yourself?" "Didn't liberate it, sir. Just convinced the garrison to leave. Pointed north. They retreated toward Meppel around 04:30 hours. Maybe 200 men, some wounded. They took their vehicles and heavy weapons. A Dutch resistance fighter approached, an older man wearing an orange armband. He spoke rapid French to Dextras, confirming Major's account. 1 Canadian, 10 hours of fighting. The Germans had fled in panic, convinced they were being overrun. Dextras shook his head slowly.
How much ammunition did you expend? Major thought about it. Started with 4 Sten magazines, 17 grenades. Captured German weapons along the way. MG-42, couple MP-40s, rifles. Used everything. Currently have 1 knife and this coffee. Casualties inflicted? Maybe 20-25 confirmed kills. Rest were prisoners I sent south, or Germans who broke and ran. Major set down the coffee cup. Sir, we need to call off the artillery bombardment. Cities full of civilians. No German presence remaining.
Dextrays was already moving to his radio operator. The planned bombardment was scheduled for 0600 hours, less than 40 minutes away. The artillery batteries had their coordinates, were probably loading rounds right now. At 0534 hours, the fire mission was cancelled. 30,000 pounds of high-explosive shells that would have turned Zwolle into rubble remained unfired. By 0600 hours, the full Canadian force had entered the city. Engineers began clearing roadblocks, medics treated wounded civilians, and Major was still sitting on the church steps, too exhausted to move. A Dutch woman brought him bread and cheese. A child gave him a small orange flack. An elderly man knelt beside him and kissed both his cheeks, weeping, thanking him in Dutch that Major didn't fully understand but knew the meaning of anyway. Dextrays found him again an hour later. There's a field hospital 2 kilometers south. You need medical attention. I'm fine, sir. Major, you've been in combat for 10 consecutive hours. You're wounded in at least 3 places I can see. You're going to the hospital. After I see Willie, sir, he's still out there. They found Private Willie Arsenault's body at 0721 hours, exactly where Major said it would be. The rail yard south of town, 200 yards from the checkpoint Major had overrun in his opening attack. Arsenault had been dead for 9 hours. Major stood over his friend's body for a long moment, then helped load him onto a stretcher. He should have seen this, Major said quietly. Should have seen them free. At the field hospital, doctors treated Major for exhaustion, dehydration, multiple lacerations, burns on his hands from hot weapons, and bruised ribs from diving for cover. He'd been operating on adrenaline and rage for so long that when it finally wore off, he could barely stand. He slept for 16 hours straight. When he woke, Dextrays was waiting with paperwork. I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Conduct Medal, 2nd highest decoration for valor. A one-man liberation of an occupied city seems to qualify. Major shrugged. Just didn't want those civilians to die, sir. The Dutch want to give you their Bronze Lion. The mayor wants to make you an honorary citizen. You're a hero, Private. Willie Arsenault was the hero, sir. He took the bullets meant for me. The Distinguished Conduct Medal came through 6 months later, after the war ended. The citation read, "For gallantry and distinguished service in the liberation of Zwolle, Netherlands, demonstrating exceptional courage, initiative, and tactical skill against vastly superior enemy forces." Major accepted the medal, put it in a drawer, and never talked about that night unless directly asked. The war ended 3 weeks after Zwolle. Major returned to Montreal, worked as a pipe fitter, raised 3 children. The city of Zwolle named him a street, Léo Major Lawn. Every year on April 14, Dutch schoolchildren learned about the one-eyed Canadian who freed their city alone. In 1951, he re-enlisted for the Korean War. At Hill 355 in November, he and 18 men from the Royal 22nd Regiment held off 14,000 Chinese troops through an entire night of close combat. He won a 2nd Distinguished Conduct Medal, the only Canadian soldier to receive the decoration twice in 2 different wars. He died in Montreal in 2008 at 87 years. His funeral in Zwolle drew thousands of Dutch citizens who had never met him but knew his story. The mayor said, "He gave us our freedom when freedom seemed impossible." The German garrison that fled Zwolle surrendered to Canadian forces 2 days later near Meppel. Their commander, when interrogated, estimated he'd been facing at least a full Canadian company, 120 men, based on the intensity and coordination of the attacks.
he'd been facing one half-blind private from Montreal who decided 50,000 civilians mattered more than following orders, who turned grief into action, fear into aggression, and impossible odds into victory through pure audacity. Léo Major didn't liberate Zwolle with superior firepower or numerical advantage. He liberated it by making the enemy believe they'd already lost, by being everywhere at once, by turning one man's rage into an army's terror. On the morning of April 14, 1945, the sun rose over a free city because one Canadian soldier refused to let his friend die for nothing. If this story earned your time, hit the like button. It costs nothing and tells YouTube this video matters. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, accounts of real people facing impossible situations with nothing but skill and nerve. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Did anyone in your family serve in the Second World War? This community spans the globe, from California to Tasmania, from veterans to history students. Let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. These stories deserve to be remembered. You're making that happen.